We are gonna run out of battery at this rate, and also my hair is gonna defluff. My hair is going to defluff, so we gotta do this. We gotta do it quickly. Bam, 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 boom, boom, boom. Let's go. All right, here we go, class. Today we embrace our most basic of bitch, and start at the top with photography. VC28 Lecture 1, Drawing with Light. I'm aware that most of you guys have probably been using some manner of camera since your infancy. If you were born after the year 2000, it's probable that your experience of photography is less as a process and more of as a tool. For it is during this year, 2000, that digital cameras and mobile phones became forever inextricably linked as that monolithic device that you used to play Mobile Legends on the toilet or send nudes to strangers. Please only do that with their consent. See, I'm a cool mom. I anticipate that your conception of photography is as something more automatic and precise and less tedious or unpredictable than it was for our predecessors. That's just natural. The technology, as it was handed down to you, was already free from many of the technical trappings that really kept it from being an everyday thing. Back in the 90s at least, photography had more of a special occasion specialness to it. You had to prepare if you knew you wanted to take pictures. Usually there was a birthday or a trip or an event you wanted to memorialize. Pictures of everyday nothingness or so-called vernacular photography, this way, right? Were something of a privilege to own. And to be even a little good at photography meant you had to know a lot about it. I know this because that's all you need to know. And I know what you're thinking.
This is the part where she tells us we're just dumb kids and that digital photography isn't real photography and that she's gonna school us on the ways of the masters.
No, Gen X. Hell no, my little peach mango pies. I think there is actually great value in the fact that you guys have, for all intents and purposes, been seeing photographically, as Edward Weston put it in his 1943 essay of the same name that I'm hoping you have or will read within this week. It's in your course pack. Go dig it out, week 2 PDF. For as long as you've had language. Did you get that? It was like a whole thought. Edward Weston and the Pictorialists. Edward Weston was an early 20th century American photographer whose life work was to get people to recognize photography as a legitimate art form. It may surprise you to learn that with the advent of the photographic process, other artists from more traditional practices, such as painters or sculptors, but especially painters, saw photography as somewhat
disruptive.
The fear has sometimes been expressed that photography would in time entirely supersede the art of painting. Some people seem to think that when the process of taking photographs in colors has been perfected and made common enough, the painter will have nothing more to do.
boo.
Photography encroaches on any department of art, it is that of the engraver. For however ingenious the processes or surprising the results of photography, it must be remembered that this art only aspires to copy. It cannot invent. The camera, it is true, is the most accurate copyist, but it is no substitute for original thought or invention. Nor can it supply that refined feeling and sentiment which animate the productions of a man of genius, and so long as invention and feeling constitute essential qualities in a work of art, photography can never assume a higher rank than engraving.
Shots fired at both photography and engraving. Jesus.
Engravers is weak sauce.
Photography can never supersede fine art, and no matter what greater perfection of development it may reach, it will still remain just as imperative as ever that the artist should labor faithfully and patiently to record facts of natural aspects. This labor being the only way in which the artist's language can be learned, and his feelings disciplined to recognize the noblest conditions of truth and beauty. The photograph cannot supersede art, because no photograph can represent complete facts. All labor of love must have something beyond mere mechanism at the bottom of it.
What does that even mean? Gatekeeping, man, the only truly timeless art form. But this is the environment into which many of the first photographers emerged. In an attempt to lend legitimacy to their work and rebut their detractors, early photographers, known as pictorialists, attempted to use many of the visual conventions of painting in their work in order to demonstrate that photography too required the skill and eye and attention that painting did.
Hey, we can be just as sexist, racist, colonialist, and deeply cynical as any of the other traditional arts.
What? That's the tea, hunty. There were many ways that pictorialists achieved their results, including but not limited to piecing together different negatives to form a new composition. At the time, you could kind of snip around them and just literally piece them together, Photoshop 1.0. Adding pigments to their prints so they could adjust the coloring. This was before the advent of color photography. Fudging their lenses or interfering with the development of their prints in order to achieve more surreal, dreamlike effects. My favorite from this era is Julia Margaret Cameron, a Briton, who would create these exceedingly beautiful and thoughtful soft-focus portraits depicting her subjects as mythological, literary, or religious figures. It's a legit 19th century cosplay, and you need to look her up right now. She's amazing. Here's her name again. Julia Margaret Cameron, go for it. To the pictorialists, the photograph was just the starting point. It was just a fragment of a larger, newer, future composition that more demonstrably showcased the hand of the artist. The pictorialists and the artistic tradition that photography was birthed into were unable to yet see the wielding of this particular mechanical tool, the camera, as an art form in and of itself. Their idea of what it meant to create art was so entrenched in the tradition of painting and the plastic arts that it almost felt like for someone to make art, they had to leave a literal thumbprint in the work. It must have something beyond the mere mechanism at the bottom of it. The mere mechanism at the bottom of it. Shady bitch. This debate about whether or not photography was art went on for years and years and years, until one day, in the early 19th century, our woke boy, Edward Weston Ocasio-Cortez, who participated in the pictorialist movement himself, was like,
Nah, bruh. Photographs are art just as much as music is art, and paintings are art. And the camera is a tool. Like a trumpet or a guitar is a tool. Or a paintbrush is a tool.
This is me paraphrasing, he didn't actually. Well, he said the stuff about the music, you should read the reading. Weston then focuses his work on the camera specifically as an artistic tool. What could it do that other tools could not do? What would it look like if we were to view the byproducts of the camera as pure art already, without the need for additional interventions? What if photography was, in and of itself, good actually? For Weston, photography started in the mind, in the same way that any other traditional art form does. Pre-visualization, or visualizing the final image in your mind beforehand, was a necessary step in the photographic process, and part of being able to use a camera appropriately, according to Weston. Camera operation and printing techniques were only valuable insofar as they were able to get you to the image that you saw in your mind's eye.
The photographer should not be concerned with the right exposure, the perfect negative, etc. Such notions are mere products of advertising mythology. Rather, he must learn the kind of negative necessary to produce a given kind of print, and then the kind of exposure and development necessary to produce that negative. With practice, this kind of knowledge becomes intuitive. The photographer learns to see a scene or object in terms of his finished print, without having to give conscious thought to the steps that will be necessary to carry it out.
What? He says it's all in the mind. So by this logic, a photograph is only as good as it is able to match the image that the photographer has pre-visualized. But also, the photograph is not to be tampered with. A photograph could have just as much value and meaning and truth and artistic merit as a painting or sculpture. For crying out loud, the guy didn't even believe in cropping images after they had been shot. Cropping. So fervent was his belief that the camera itself was capable of producing pure art. Am I going too fast? I have some discussion questions about this that I'm going to post in Classroom, so please be on the lookout for those. Seeing photographically. So that brings us to seeing photographically. What did Weston mean by this? In his essay, Weston writes,
The photographer's most important and likewise most difficult task is not learning to manage his camera. It is learning to see photographically. That is, learning to see his subject matter in terms of the capacities of his tools and processes, so that he can instantaneously translate the elements and values in a scene before him into a photograph he wants to make. The pictorialists used to contend that photography could never be an art because there was in the process no means for controlling the result. Actually, the problem of learning to see photographically would be simplified if there were fewer means of control than there are. By varying the position of his camera, the photographer can achieve an infinite number of varied compositions with a single stationary subject. By changing the light on the subject, any or all of the values in the subject can be altered. Thus, within the limits of his medium, the photographer can depart from literal recording to whatever extent he chooses.
So, to see photographically is to know what you're doing. It's to have a goal. It's to know that every step you take after your idea is formed in your mind is a step towards that end product. It's seeing the tool in your hand as just that, a tool. The camera is a tool, the light is a tool, your phone is a tool, Photoshop is a tool, Instagram is a tool, TikTok is a tool, filters are a tool, it's all a tool, in service of the image in your mind's eye. Indeed, to see photographically is something of an acquired skill. It isn't innate. And in fact, some of us here might be feeling a bit defensive that this doesn't really apply to our day and age, or resistant to the idea of having to imagine the perfect image before even touching the camera. And then also just leaving that image to its own devices without at least running it through auto levels, or auto curves, or Snapseed, or Visco, or whatever. On God's green internet, are you crazy? Yamero! It's helpful to remember that back then, there really wasn't much room for experimentation unless you were super wealthy or had unlimited time. Each exposure typically took several minutes to several hours to set up before the first exposure was even made. Wala pang test shot nun, di pa uso. If you fucked up the first time, you fucked up for good. And especially on the 8x10 large format camera that Weston was using at the time, and yes, that is a letter-sized negative that he used. It was heavy as shit and sensitive to light, and it was wet and you couldn't drop it and you couldn't see what you did until hours or days later after you had poured all the chemicals on it and dried it. And even then, you had to wait until you could actually print the thing, and there were just so many ways to fuck shit up. So ang point lang ni Sir is know where you're going. And I think that is something that we can use today because it is so easy for us to experiment and to just try things out without consequence. It's easier for us to think when creating artwork with such an advanced and immediate tool.
I'll get there when I get there. I'll know it when I see it.
Weston says, no, know it first. But I also think by his definition, it actually is easier for us in the era of the mobile phone camera to see and think photographically. There are less barriers between us and an image, so sometimes seeing photographically is just a matter of seeing a thing and thinking,
Oh, I've got to get a picture of that.
it just works differently for us digital natives. Us. We can look at a colored wall and know how it might look on our grid or our timeline, or we'll know how to stand in front of it. We walk into a museum and can spot the best place for a group shot. May those among us who have never tried any of those here's how to smile like a model hacks, please leave the building. We know our best angles and we know what to do with our hands. We know what it means for us to photograph our lunch versus taking a selfie. So for us, photographing is not just a matter of making art or not anymore. It's become an actual extension of our existence. That is a whole other bag of bananas that I won't get into right now, but rest assured that I have bananas worth of things to say about this topic. Bananas. Coconuts. Bananas. I did a whole thesis on it. If you want to see my graduate lecture, it's on my YouTube channel. Like, share, and subscribe. White balance. Wow, did anyone else just get whiplash from that seemingly quick and unrelated topic change? Because I sure did not. I wrote this video essay and I knew where it was going. That is seen photographically. My audio on the second half is so much louder, I'm sorry. White balance is the process of adjusting a digital image to achieve a favorable color cast. I thought white balance would be a good place for us to start messing around with our cameras because it is one of the tools that we have access to in digital photography that we really don't in analog or film photography. Edward Weston could never. What? Indeed, the ability to adjust white balance as we shoot is an exclusively digital tool. And yes, I know there are filters. You can check out the photo school PDF I put in your course pack if you want to learn more about how to play with white balance as an analog user. Don't be splaining to me. It's also one of the first challenges that photographers encounter in their first attempts at seeing photographically using a digital camera as their tool. Often, color cast is the first thing we notice that doesn't line up with our expectations. Expectations. Reality. The reason for this is that our eyes naturally adjust to the temperature of light, whereas the camera needs a bit of help. So if we aren't using the right settings, we might end up with some funky results. White balance can also be super tricky if you're working with multiple light sources, each with different temperatures. Sinong mag-a-adjust? Bakit parang kasalanan ko? This week, check out the work of Laura Skinner, linked in your course guides, or you can search for her project Experimental. She takes photographs of setups of experiments from elementary school science books, a good number of them using quite unusual light sources. Her project called Cellular Portraits is on her website as well. This is another fascinating project that uses white balance. Observe how her use of white balance aids in the goals of her project as a whole and how it is used as a tool. Iba-iba, diba? She's not straining for some objective, perfect white balance. Instead, you can see that she has an idea and that she's using white balance to point to that idea. Plate 1. White balance and you. For our first plate, I will ask you to choose an object. Choose something three-dimensional and something that is easy to take around. It could be a doll, house decor, personal item, Funko Pop, whatever. No flat things, no books. Piloso po kayo. Just something with a bit of dimension that will look interesting under different lighting conditions. Then, I will need you to do the unthinkable and turn off that blasted auto white balance on your camera and come join me in the Kelvin manual white balance side of the force.
Excellent. I can feel your hate.
Okay, this is how it works. Every light source, a light bulb, an LED, your laptop, the microwave, the sun, paper, snow, ghost. All of these give off a certain color temperature. Even the sun, which might feel the most neutral to you, has a color temperature. Now, these temperatures translate to a specific cast on any digital image that you will take. What auto white balance tries to do is to find gray things in your viewfinder and figure out what color the light is based on how it changes the gray. So if it's kind of making the gray warm, your camera thinks it's a warm light. If it's making the gray a little bit bluer, it knows it's a cool light. Based on that information, auto white balance corrects the image. So it says something like, oh, there's a bit of green in the gray. This image must be lit with a fluorescent light. Chuk-chuk. Adjust. But okay, auto white balance can also be pretty stupid. How the hell does it know if a thing is actually gray or if it is just some kind of muddy color? It can make some reasonable guesses, and I do think auto white balance technology has gotten better, especially on phones where I never use manual white balance anyway. But on a digital camera, girl. Don't let that auto white balance rob you of the ability to control your output. So your task, should you choose to accept it, joke lang, wala kang choice. Take the object that you chose, like something like this. I don't know. Whatever. Choose the thing. I want you to find 7 different lighting conditions to put it in. It sounds like a lot, but I promise you there are absolutely more than 7 just in the place you're sitting right now. Find them. You can get ideas from the Photo School PDF in your course packs, or you can take a cue from Laura Skinner. Either way, I want to see 7 different lighting setups for your little boy or girl or non-binary pal. And here's where we're seeing photographically comes in. Using manual white balance mode, attempt to photograph that object consistently in each lighting condition. The other settings, I don't care so much. Use what you're comfortable with for right now. The important thing about this exercise is to use white balance on Kelvin or manual. So the way that Kelvin works as a system is the higher the number, the warmer your camera compensates. So by raising the number, you are effectively making your image warmer. If you're lowering the number, you're making the image cooler. Okay, and also, I know it's super easy to correct white balance now digitally. I know, I get it. I always do it. I know I also said use all the tools at your disposal to achieve your stated goals. I know. However, we're in school and we're trying to learn camera operation, so don't be a smart ass. Get it right in camera. There will be a time for digital manipulation later, but for this plate only, no digital post-processing. No. Grading rubric is on Classroom. Submission thread will be there as well. The submission date, I'm gonna assume I don't know it right now, and check Classroom. It'll be there. Alright, that's it. Go do your things. Meet with me on Zoom if you'd like to consult about this project, and I will see you guys next week. Peace. So I just noticed that I had lipstick on my chin. I am not used to makeup anyway.